Hello, and welcome to whatever this is going to be. I actually don't really know yet. My name's Kevin. I really like talking about video games, and sometimes people like listening to me talk about video games. So I thought I would make something that would let me talk about video games. Today I am here with my friend Kartik.
Hello, I am Kartik. I'm a indie game developer with Finite Reflection Studios, and I'm excited to listen and talk with Kevin about video games.
So Kartik, so the general idea of this show or podcast or whatever I decide to do with this is that I like a lot of weird games, or I don't know, games that people generally don't really think about much. Or I feel like I don't see people talk about much, and I kind of want to shine a spotlight on these games. And maybe, sometimes they're not necessarily the best games, but they do things that are interesting that I think are worth looking at. And
Gems, maybe.
yeah, little hidden gems. And I often have a lot of thoughts about them that I don't really have anywhere to put, so that's what this is for. So the first game I want to talk about is, and the only game we're going to talk about today, or the main game we're going to talk about today. Have you ever heard of the game Excitebots?
Excitebots.
Excite.
Does it have anything to do with Excite Bikes?
It does.
Haha.
So, it is. We're going a little bit of a history lesson here about the Excite series. Before we get into what Excitebots is and why I like it so much. So,
Full disclosure, I think the only thing I know about Excite Bikes is I think it's a trophy in Smash Ultimate, right?
it was a trophy in one of the Smash games.
Yeah.
It's an assist trophy in one of the Smash
Assist trophy,
games.
that's right, yeah.
But it is a very old Nintendo series. It's been around since the early NES days. The first Excitebike game came out in 1984 in Japan, 1985 in North America. This was, back in the early days when Nintendo was still, like, the NES or Famicom had just come out, and they were still making games with, like, the arcade mindset. So they weren't, like, long adventures like they would start making after Super Mario Brothers, but they were, stuff like Excitebike and, took more along the lines of the original Donkey Kong. And so, Donkey Kong, Excitebike, original Mario Brothers, non-Super variety, those kinds of games. And so Excitebike was a racing game. And it was good. By the standards back then, it was probably quite good. It's actually a pretty interesting game looking back at it, because it's surprisingly technical. Like, it's a side-scrolling racing game. You're riding motorcycles, and but there's a surprising amount to it. Like, there's a boost meter that you can hold a button, and you will go faster. But if the boost meter reaches gets full, you overheat and you crash.
The temperature meter that I'm seeing in the center middle of the screen?
Yeah. So
Nice.
So that's a mechanic that you still see in racing games today. I mean, you see, like, boost mechanics and stuff like Burnout or MotorStorm. I mean, I guess that's not really today. Those series also haven't had games in a while, but like a boost meter is a very common mechanic. Similarly, there is jumps, which that wasn't something you typically got in racing games back then, which were usually, like, pretty flat.
Right.
Stuff like, I guess, Spy Hunter is a racing game that you would have gotten back then, which I guess wasn't really a racing game but a driving game. But I will try to avoid getting on too many tangents.
Well, to risk another tangent, how does Excitebike relate temporally to Mario Kart?
It came out many years earlier. So I think the original Super Mario Kart was 1993 or 94. it was a Super Nintendo game, and it was like a mid-era Super Nintendo game. So Excitebike came out several years, like nearly a decade before that. So it was a very, very early game. So on top of the boost mechanic, one of the main features of the game is jumping. Like, you know, you're riding on dirt bikes. You're gonna have cool jumps. If you don't have sweet jumps, it's not a dirt bike game.
Right.
And like there is depth in how you approach these jumps, because you know sometimes you might want to slow down as you hit the jump because you don't want to take the full jump, so you won't land on the next jump in a way that slows you down. Like if you land on a slope that's going up, you will slow down. So you want to land on a slope that's going down.
Right.
And you also can tilt when you're in the air, forward and backward. And if you land level with the ground that you land on, be it, you know, flat ground, downhill or uphill, you will lose considerably less speed. So it's a real simple game, but there is a surprising amount of depth in it. Later,
Yeah, looks like it. It's funny actually that you're mentioning this because it reminded me a little bit of a really popular early iOS game, which was basically just that mechanic, right? Of like tapping to hold down to like land on the downside of a slope so that you pick up more speed and go flying off. I never really realized that was the core game loop of Excitebike, and that was the origin of that mechanic.
yeah. I mean,
Oh, Tiny Wings. That was the name of the game I was thinking about. Tiny Wings.
I'm not sure if Excitebike is necessarily the origin. I feel like that's probably a mechanic that you would come up with anyway. I mean, I don't know. You see something like Sonic the Hedgehog. That's a has all the ramps and jumps and stuff, and is about, you know, maintaining momentum. I feel like if you're making a momentum-based game, you're going to naturally stumble upon the idea of trying to land on the downhill slope.
Right.
But I feel like it was a pretty ambitious thing for 1984.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So after that, the series sort of went on hiatus for a while. The most it really saw was sort of re-releases and reimaginings of the original Excitebike. They saw like there was Excitebike Versus, which was an arcade version, which I believe, you know, based on the name, had multiplayer. There was Mario Excitebike, where they just made Excitebike, but it was Mario characters. And the next real game in the series was Excitebike 64. Can you guess what console this was for?
Nintendo 64, I'm gonna guess.
Yes. So in 2000, developer Left Field Studios, who had a pretty good relationship with Nintendo at the time. Nintendo had reached out to Western studios to kind of build up their Western third-party portfolio. And so Left Field Studios was one of the studios who they reached out to. They worked with them on, for example, the NBA courtside games, and the classic The Little Mermaid 2 Pinball Frenzy for the Game Boy Color, which was apparently published by Nintendo and made by Left Field. I don't know. Nintendo game I actually haven't played. So anyway, they brought back Excitebike with Excitebike 64. So
All right.
Excitebike
Oh,
64.
we moved into 3D now.
Yeah, so Excitebike 64 was, you know, this was full on proper 3D reimagining of the game. And it sort of took an interesting direction, because I said that the original Excitebike was surprisingly technical for its time. Like, you really had to think about how you took jumps and stuff, and, you know, if you did things wrong, you fell off the bike and lost some time. And Excitebike 64 like went heavy on the technical elements, which I found surprising when I played it for the first time. It like there's a long tutorial section all about, okay, here is exactly how you have to take different turns, and if you do it wrong, you fall off your bike. And also, if you run into other bikes wrong, like you can clip other bikes by hitting their front wheel with your back wheel, and that will knock them over. But if you run into someone else's back wheel with your front wheel, you run over. And I believe this actually was a mechanic in the original Excitebike as well. But in Excitebike 64, you know, this full 3D game, it's a bit different. I don't know. I don't really like Excitebike 64. I think it's an interesting and impressive game, but I feel like it's less Excite and more bike, if that makes sense.
Less, they lost some of the arcadiness, it seems, and centered it a little bit more on the simulation-y elements of it, perhaps?
Yeah, and I, you know, it's still not a simulation, but I feel like there have definitely been dirt bike games that went way more over the top. Like, you know, there's still real big jumps. There's still the boost mechanic. There's still but it retains a lot of the elements in the original Excitebike. It is very much an Excitebike game. A big one is the making sure you land level with the ground. You lose speed if you don't. So, and then, you know, the temperature gauge and boost mechanic, that's there. But it's not the direction I think I would have taken the Excitebike series. And it's not, you know, it reviewed well. I think it has its fans. I don't want to say, you know, anyone's wrong for liking it. It's not my favorite game.
Sure, yeah.
But it apparently sold quite well. So the next hiatus the series had wasn't quite as long. In 2006, we got not an Excitebike game, but kind of expanded the series beyond just the Excitebike series to become the Excite series. We got, as a Wii launch title, this game.
This is a launch title for Wii. Interesting.
This is a launch title. It's called Excite Truck. And whereas Excitebike 64 sort of downplayed the Excite, Excite Truck kind of really, really emphasized the Excite. It's kind of an insane game. And it's, I'm going to talk about this one a lot more than Excitebike 64 because it's really relevant to the main topic of this episode. Basically, it's one of the most over the top racing games I've played. The jumps are huge. There's this whole terrain deformation mechanic where if you hit certain power-ups like exclamation points, it'll create another huge jump, and you can go off that huge jump and get huge air. And a really interesting thing about this game is it's not exactly a racing game. Like, you're racing, but getting first place isn't the goal. The goal is to get stars. And getting first place gets you a big bunch of stars, so you still want to get first place, but you can get stars in other ways. You can get stars by going off of big jumps. You can get stars by driving dangerously and getting really close to trees. You can get stars by making other trucks crash. You even get stars for crashing. You basically get stars for everything.
Sounds a lot like, you know, a lot of the game modes in, oh shoot, you mentioned this Burnout series, right? They had a number of modes in the various games in the Burnout series where it's not about the race, it's about like how much carnage you can cause.
Yeah, something like that. So, but it's still like you are racing. You still want to get first place, and there's there's a timer, so you can't just like farm stars by going off the same jump over and over again. But it's this kind of interesting thing where you want to you're sort of encouraged to drive dangerously, drive recklessly, but you still want to go fast and get first so you can get that big chunk of stars at the end. And you and then at the end, based on how many stars you have, you get a rating. So if you just want to like technically win, it's not that hard to get like a C ranking on every level. But if you actually want to like beat the game, you have to get an S rank, and it turns into a very it gets really intense getting an S rank, because you have to pretty much constantly be doing crazy tricks or anything to get stars. You can't waste any time not getting stars.
Yeah, this looks like a really ambitious game for its time. Like, even looking at it now, I'm like, I don't know how I would implement some of this like terrain manipulation that's happening in real time, and having it not like mess with the physics of what you're trying to do too much,
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive how seamlessly it kind of fits into the gameplay here.
Yeah, and especially considering it was on the Wii. Like,
exactly,
right. It was on, very much older hardware compared to the competition at the time. And there was a similar game released near the release of the PlayStation 3 called MotorStorm, which was also like an off-road racing game that was compared a lot at the time, at least in the discussions I saw, where it also had, like, for example, the temperature gauge that originated in the original Excitebike. So they bring that back in Excite Truck, and it's really interesting that this other completely different off-road truck racing game, MotorStorm, used a similar temperature gauge. And it I don't know. I might talk about MotorStorm someday, because that's also kind of a great game. But anyway, back to Excite Truck. It like I said, it does bring back elements of the Excite series. So it brings back the temperature boost gauge. It brings back the landing. If you land level, and okay, they kind of reverse it though. In the older games, if you don't land level, you lose speed. In this game, if you do land level, you get a speed boost. So this game is all about like going fast, and much more about rewarding you than punishing you, if that makes sense.
I mean, the footage I'm watching right now, one of the things I like is like anytime that it looks like the player made a mistake, like they like veered off course and rammed into a tree, it's like, nice crash.
Yeah. So that brings up a really interesting thing. So one thing about this game is, it was a Wii game. Obviously, it had to use motion controls. So the steering is done by tilting the Wii remote left and right.
Right.
Now, this was pretty common in Wii games, and usually it was terrible. You're just like, just give me an analog stick, because, like, it's not as accurate. Like, just, especially since it had an accelerometer and not a gyroscope, it wasn't as accurate. But the cool thing about Excite Truck is it's designed around this inaccuracy. The courses are wide open, have many multiple paths. If you miss your turn, you can get another turn. If you crash, it says, good job, awesome. The game knows that the motion controls aren't the most accurate thing, and it makes it fun despite it. Like it's sort of like in this place where you constantly feel like you're barely in control, but that's what makes it fun. Right? Like, I don't know, what was it, the Tokyo Drift, where they said, if you're not out of control, you're not in control?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's kind of the core gameplay of Excite Truck. And then and let's talk about the developer. So this game was developed by a new studio who hadn't worked on the series before, called Monster Games. Now,
Hmm.
before this, they had really only done a few like NASCAR games, so that this was like a big thing. Like this, Western studio who hadn't really done much before was suddenly working with, they were being given the rights to revive a Nintendo IP, and it was going to be a launch title. At least in North America, it was a launch title, and elsewhere in the world, came out a few months later. But yeah, so Monster Games made this game. It was a launch title. It was decently well received, but the Wii went in sort of a different direction than I think a lot of people expected when Wii Sports kind of became the big selling point. So between the three first-party launch titles, Wii Sports, Zelda Twilight Princess, and Excite Truck, Excite Truck was by far kind of the least exciting, I guess, ironically.
I can tell you which of those games I got when the Wii launched.
Yeah, I mean, everyone got Wii Sports because it came with it, and everyone got Zelda because it was Zelda.
Right.
So, after this game came out, and I believe it sold reasonably well, though, despite that, just based on being a launch title. But a few years later, we didn't hear anything from the series. Like, it kind of seemed like an Excite Truck 2 was pretty likely, though. Just, typically if a game gets a launch title and does reasonably well, it'll eventually get a sequel to kind of see if the initial success was just because it was a launch title, or, if the series has further potential. We didn't hear anything for a few years until February 6th, 2009. A new game was announced, and I put announce in very, very big air quotes here, because there wasn't like a press release or anything. Nintendo just said, hey, here's this, the usual release list that we send out every quarter to tell people, to retailers and publications, what games are coming up. And on that list was a game called Excitebots Trick Racing. This game had never been mentioned before. Nobody knew anything about it. That was all we got, was a title, and the fact that it was coming out April 20th, 2009. Now, I'm going to do some math here. We found out about this game's title on February 26th, 2009. It came out in April 20th, 2009. That is less than 2 months between when we learned about the game and when it was set to come out. And again, we knew absolutely nothing about this game except the title as of February 6th. Or February 26th.
Yeah.
So that's really weird, right? Like,
Yeah.
So from
And it wasn't treated like some sort of publicity stunt that, like, ooh, we're gonna suddenly launch something. It seemed more just like maybe they didn't think people were gonna care.
Yeah. So then a couple weeks later, we finally get a trailer, a video. Just give it a watch and tell me what you think.
Right. Immediately right off the bat, I like how the title reveal begins with emphasizing Excite. It pauses for a second and then revealed bots. Because I'm assuming, they wanted people to recognize that name. Oh, wow. Yeah, they just kind of went, like, ham with all the modes here. This feels like a proper, what I would imagine Nintendo of, the Switch era, if they said that they were going to make a racing game. I wouldn't expect them to make, I guess what we saw with Excite Bike 64. I would expect something like this, something kind of zany, something that really doesn't do what you expect it to do. And that's what this whole trailer is, just a bunch of unexpected stuff back to back.
It is a very weird game. And watching this was very confusing. I mean, between the sudden release, I mean the sudden announcement and imminent release, and just like all of the crazy nonsense happening in this trailer, where, oh, okay, there's a robot ladybug, super sandwich, super red bar. What is happening? And yeah, it was a very confusing trailer when it came out. And then the game came out when they said it would come out April 20th. Absolutely no fanfare, no marketing beyond that one trailer as far as I remember. And here's the great thing, it only came out in North America. It only ever really came out in North America. It never released in Europe or Australia. It eventually released 2 years later in Japan, only as a Club Nintendo reward. Now, do you know what Club Nintendo is?
Yeah, I'm a little bit familiar with it.
Well, so for anyone who may not be familiar, it is basically an online thing where like you would buy games and then you would get points and you could exchange those points for rewards. And Nintendo still does something similar to that. I don't know if they still call it Club Nintendo, but usually
it's like the platinum rewards, platinum and gold points and stuff.
Yeah. And so usually it was like a little trinkets or something, or like I don't. Usually it wasn't full games, and the fact that this full game was only ever available in Japan through this system is just bizarre. That's the only way they wanted to release the game. But yeah, so it did come out, and it reviewed kind of moderately, but most people didn't notice it, as you would expect from a game that nobody knew existed. But and the first time I played it, I didn't really know what to make of it. But as the years have passed, it's a game that I think about a lot, and I returned to recently, and I realized I think this is one of my favorite racing games, just because of how crazy it is. And how
played this originally on what is this, the Wii or the Wii U?
The Wii.
Okay. Did you originally play this on the Wii when it came out then?
Yeah, I got it when it came out. Because I was very fascinated. It was a very interesting looking game. And like at the time I think I liked it, but returning to it recently, I was like, okay, this is actually a really great game. And so, okay, let's go into some detail on what we were looking at here. What is a super sandwich? What is a butterfly rescue? What is a pie face? Basically, the core of the game is just like Excite Truck. You are racing to get stars. But now you are transforming robot animals. And there are far more ways to get stars. You can still get stars by driving, dangerously, by driving close to trees. You still get stars for getting first place. You still get stars for crashing. But there are now little, I guess, mini games. They're almost like WarioWare micro games scattered throughout the course that you will run into a question mark and it will give you a baseball bat, and then you have to press the A button when a giant flaming baseball falls from the sky. And you have to time it just right to get to hit it, and you get stars, and that's it. And then you keep going. Or there's one where like you pick up a tambourine and it goes ch 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 ch, and then you have to press A and time with ch ch. And it's great because it doesn't tell you that. You just had it's just kind of this cultural understanding that if you hear da 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 da, the next obvious thing is da da, and it's like I don't know, and it says nice tambourine and gives you stars, and then you keep racing. And beyond that, there are these mini games kind of go more than just getting stars. Sometimes, if you complete a mini game successfully, it will open up a new path, or like it'll do the terrain deformation thing from Excite Truck, and like give you a shortcut. Another major element is there are bars, which you probably need to go to after watching this trailer. I don't know. That was a dumb joke.
I liked it. Yeah, no, that was. I was just looking at that. I can see that being both a very cool feature and also like a source of frustration due to it being exclusively controlled with the motion controls, right?
Yeah. Well, so the mini games are typically controlled with just by pressing the A button. Like it's more like a timed button press, but sometimes you have to, like, sometimes you're throwing a dart and you press A to throw the dart, but you have to be pointed in the right direction. I don't know. It's
interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Anyway, going back to the bars before my dumb bad joke. So there are like yellow bars and red bars and pink bars, and the idea is your little robot dude has an arm that can stick out of its back, and it will grab onto the bar and you will spin around the bar, and then if you push the controller forward at the right time, you will shoot off the bar. Or, I mean, it depends on the bar. For like the yellow bars, you will spin around the bar and then push the controller forward and, shoot off the bar in the direction it points you. And then there's red bars where you slowly spin the controller, move the controller in a circle to build up speed, and then you launch off the bar once you get enough speed. Once you do, I think it's 10 circles around the bar. And there's like other bars where there's like a curved pink bar where it flips you in the air and you can, do little spins. And if you time it well, you get a boost. If you don't time it well, it sends you into kind of it doesn't crash you, but it makes you hard to control, and then if you land upside down, you crash. But yeah, so kind of the bars, especially the yellow bars, have a really interesting effect on the track design, because they can, like, the horizontal bars are something you can like shoot for when you're jumping through the air, and you will latch onto the bar and get extra air. So, if you're going off a jump, you can decide, okay, do I want to aim for the bar, for that horizontal yellow bar, and go further, or do I want to go for this shortcut over here? There's so many multiple paths you can decide to take. And, so in some tracks, there's like, basically, if you do it just right, you can like launch from yellow bar to yellow bar and like skip a whole section of the track. But of course, since it's not just about racing, it's like, okay, do I want to do that and miss out on some opportunities for stars, or do I want to, take the low end and, maybe get more jumps, more trees to drive past, more mini games to do. The other thing is, if there's vertical yellow bars, they can often be used to change what direction you're driving, like, instantly. So
just whip around.
Yeah, so that's really cool. Like, so there are parts where you will, complete it. You will like throw a dart or something, hit the dart. That makes a vertical yellow bar appear. You hit the yellow bar, it spins you around, and then launches you. If you time it right, it launches you through a path and, through some woods. And because you're going through some woods, you're getting a tree run for driving close to trees. And so, let's see. The video I've been showing you has been some pretty standard gameplay, but now I want to show you some like S-rank gameplay. And this says speed run, but this is basically how you have to play the game if you want to get S rank on the highest difficulty. And this is why I love this game. Because it, like, on the hardest difficulty, you basically have to constantly be doing stuff. And I said this about Excite Truck, where you have to, constantly be doing, jumps and, tree runs and stuff. But now it's even more with, like, the bar spins and the mini games and just all sorts of crazy stuff. Like, doing an S rank run is just like, you just have to concentrate for, like, the 3 minutes or whatever it takes to get through the race. Like, just focus. It's one of those games where it's like, okay, I am hyper focused, and then at the end you kind of realize, like, oh hey, I haven't breathed in 30 seconds. And
yeah, I mean, in this clip that I'm watching, this player is just like non-stop, like, just trying to do things. That there's never like a dull second, because they can't afford to sit still, otherwise you're missing out on points.
Yeah. Oh, another thing I meant to mention earlier in Excite Truck, but also applies to Excitebots. Okay, so when you're in the air, you can do a spin to to get more points. The problem is, if you do a spin, you can't control. You can't aim left and right. So you have to kind of decide, okay, do I want to relinquish control to get more points, or do I want to get the points? Like, do I want points or do I want control? And like, sometimes it's not a good idea to go for the spin, but then you kind of need to do the spins sometimes, because you're not going to get S rank without it. Like, it seems like just a little bit. Like, if you do 3 spins, you get 5 stars. But that adds up, like, when you're constantly going off jumps. So, like, that is kind of an interesting bit of depth added by the motion controls, actually, is that since spinning is done with a motion control gesture, you can't also steer while spinning. But yeah, that is something you'll see in like these S rank clips, is like, just when they go off jumps, they spin.
Right. Yeah.
So
that means that you aimed your jump perfectly, and you know exactly where you're going to land, because you no longer can control where you're going when you're spinning.
Yeah. Well, not exactly. So that, like, it still has that kind of difficult to control nature of Excite Truck, because it's still using motion controls.
Right.
But it's still designed around that. So it's like an S rank run, like, because the controls are, you're like slightly not in control, even when you're really good at the game. Even an S rank run isn't going to go perfectly. So, like, even if you know what you're doing, sometimes you might miss that turn, and you have to kind of improvise and be like, okay, well, I can either start over the race, but that's dumb. I mean, the race is only like 3 minutes long. I might as well keep going. And be like, okay, I'll take this path and see what star opportunities I have here. And so that gives it a lot of replayability, because, like, you're not just, when you're going for a high score, you're not just doing the same thing every time, because you kind of can't. There's like sort of a little bit of randomness introduced, just because the controls aren't 100% precise.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if you have analog controls in any aspect of your game, you're bound to create a higher level of replayability or nuance in your mechanics, because obviously there's, technically speaking, an infinite number of outcomes, right?
Yeah. And I have actually played this game. When I played this game recently, I decided to try playing it through an emulator on Dolphin to see, like, I wonder if I can remap the controls to controlling with an analog stick. Because, while I have been saying here, that the games are designed around the motion controls and the inaccuracies. I do still prefer an analog stick.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, like, the thing is, the games are fully playable and still very fun with the motion controls. But I did get it working with an analog stick, and it did have to take a little bit of... I had to get a little bit creative with how I laid out the controls because, like, you know, the gesture-controlled, like, minigames and stuff.
Right.
But I got it working really well, and it works really well, and it's, like, an extremely fun game, and I
It
really...
doesn't lose any of its charm because of it.
Yeah, and it still kind of... Like, it didn't even lose that sort of loose, inaccurate, like, slightly out of control feeling, because it's such a... You know, it's an off-road game, and you're driving these crazy buggies, and you're flying through the air, and you're, you know, driving on dirt, you don't have perfect traction. Like, all those elements still make you feel like you're slightly out of control, so when you pull off, like, a great tree run, even using an analog stick, it's like, oh shit, I just drove through that forest and didn't hit any trees. And then if you do hit the tree, it's fine, because the game's just like, hey, good job, you hit a tree. Okay, thanks. But yeah, that is... I'm not sure I have much more to say. It's just a really fun game.
Well,
it's really weird.
We got to talk a little bit about more, though, I think. At least I would like to talk a little bit more.
Yeah, sure.
About
You have any questions?
these gosh darn bots.
Like... Oh, yeah, they're very silly.
I mean, the vehicles, it's such a left turn for this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay.
Series going.
That is... Okay, yeah, that is interesting. Yeah. So... Yeah. I don't know what to say. It's especially weird because they decided to go with, like, critters.
Right.
Like,
all of them are based off of, like, specific, not just animals. Like, they could have done animals that you might normally associate with vehicles. Like, they could have done, like, jaguars and lions and,
yeah.
you know...
Like done a Beast Wars thing.
Right, that's what I imagined when I first started seeing where this was going, and then no, it's frogs, it's bats, it's...
Yeah. I don't know. This game is so weird. I don't know why they did that. I guess it was sort of a... I don't know, sort of a... It's playful. It's silly.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like... I don't understand why they did it, but I'm glad they did, because it gives the game such a unique personality. Like, as awesome as it would be to be racing, you know, robot grizzly bears, dinosaurs, or whatever, like, it wouldn't be Excitebots if it wasn't, like, a robot ladybug. it's just such a...
What's more impressive to me than the fact that they chose to go this route with it, that they chose specifically, you know, critters is a good way to classify the types of animals they chose. Not only did they choose critters, they make critters look cool as heck.
Yeah.
I never in my life thought I wanted to drive a, like, critter-themed car.
Yeah.
But somehow the visual designers and the 3D modeling team on this game figured out how to make, like, a ladybug style car look really kind of, well, badass.
Yeah. So, okay, I despise centipedes. They disgust me. I hate them so much. Here's sort of a gross story. A place I used to live had a centipede infestation.
Oh,
and
no.
Sometimes they would crawl on the wall. And they did not stick perfectly to the wall. So sometimes I would just be sitting there, and a centipede would fall in my hair.
God.
So
That sounds horrible.
So basically, every time I was there, like, I had to, like, every time I entered a room, I would look around, be like, are there any centipedes? And so this just, like, they're already weird, creepy creatures, but, you know, having this experience was, like, really made me hate them. But I like the centipede in this game, which is, like, I don't know how this game made me like the centipede. I hate centipedes, but I like the centipede robot in this game.
Yeah, I mean, they acquired the essence of the creature that they're going for, and then, like, just I don't know, gave it visual elements that made them feel cool. Like I'm watching like gameplay of the bat
Yeah.
variation, and like every now and then it just has these it just pops out legs and starts like walking on these like raptor legs, and somehow that still looks cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and like, oh, and I guess from a technical and like design perspective, like the bots are pretty like really detailed for a
Yeah.
Wii game, especially like if you compare it to Excite Truck. The trucks are pretty simple shapes, and there was some nice like deformation when you crashed, where the truck would get crumpled, but this one, like, there are these fully animated transforming creatures, and the transformations look really nice. Like, I
And
can
not
imagine.
only that, but like at least when you do, like you mentioned, the truck deformation and any amount of like dynamic behavior that they might have had with the trucks is nothing compared to the fact that every single truck, well, I don't even can't call them trucks, every single bot in Excitebot is a different kind of animal, which means it has to be animated differently
Yeah,
because it has different limbs, different articulating pieces and parts to it.
yeah, and yeah, that's and I love how they actually like they slightly cheat on the transformations, but not totally. Like they don't just yeah, they're actually articulating limbs that like move in different ways to like if you ever played a Transformers game, they totally cheat on the transformations.
Right,
They
yeah.
don't actually like build the toys in 3D and manipulate them. They're just like, okay, here's the humanoid model and here's the car model, and we're just gonna like use a special effect to swap between them. But this game, like yeah,
They
transition.
like you said, they did tricks, but they're cleverly hidden tricks where
Yeah,
you don't really care if they did a trick or not because it's convincing. You're like, yeah, totally. I see where that arm went and how it turned into the wing, and that just makes sense to me.
yeah. Oh, and like speaking of Transformers, like I would totally buy toys of these. like, like
Yeah, and this is kind of like where I was going to, or rather trying to say when we started talking about this, which was when I mentioned that this feels like a current era, the Switch era of Nintendo type of racing game,
yeah.
because I see a lot of profitability in this. You could make amiibos for
Oh
all
my
these
god.
different types,
Oh
right?
my god. Can you imagine like amiibos that are actually like transforming
Oh
toys?
my gosh, yeah.
God, Nintendo, please bring back the series just for that. Oh, another really weird thing about this game is the music, because my first impression was this is terrible. It's like I didn't like the music at first. It feels like a bunch of weird noises, and very, I don't know. It's not cool. But like once you play the game a lot, I don't know if it's like Stockholm syndrome, but I started to get into the music. Like it just kind of, there are parts where like it's like the way they chose critters instead of something cooler. It's weird, but it has this playfulness to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like everything about the aesthetics of this game. Oh, and then the fact that they're like driving through somewhat realistic looking environments, but all this crazy shit is happening in those environments. Like, I don't know. This game is a trip.
Yeah, you're right. I didn't even notice the. It's kind of unfair to call it an art style contrast. Actually, no. Maybe that is the fair thing to say. I was gonna
Yeah,
say something that was gonna sound a little bit more mean, but it is an art style contrast, but a one that works basically.
yeah. Oh, it's also like, okay, I didn't mention this, and I haven't mentioned this before, but a running theme throughout the series is that kind of like a world tour sort of theme. So you're not just racing in the desert level, you're racing in Egypt. And this
Right.
goes back to the original Excitebike, I believe. So the fact that they didn't abandon that, even when they went with the crazy bots, that's fun. But they kind of like reimagined what Egypt would be in this game. So, like, you're driving through a sort of realistic, or as realistic as the we can get looking desert. But then there's like a sphinx shooting fire at you or something. Yeah, it's a, I don't know, it's a crazy game.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for introducing me to the wonderful world of Excitebots.
Actually, oh yeah, I have one more. Well, okay, two more things to mention. One thing I really do not like about this game, as much as I like it, is the unlock system, which is based on using the stars you collect to buy new things, which sounds great, but it's like the balance is terrible. The balance feels like a mobile game where they're intentionally giving you way less than you need to make you spend money on getting more stars so you can buy the stuff you want. But it's not that. Like it doesn't have microtransactions. So apparently when it originally came out, the way to get stars was through online. Like you got way more stars if you played online. Now I didn't know this because I don't like playing competitive online games. But yeah, so now that the Wii Online is down, it's just kind of like you're not going to unlock all the bots. You're going to have to grind to unlock the later bots, and then you have to grind a ton more if you want to unlock like the special. So every bot has a special costume. Like they have different colors, which only change the color. But then they have like a special costume that changes the bot totally. So like the centipede, I think, turns into a dragon. It's still clearly a centipede, but it's a centipede. A centipede dressed up as a dragon. Like, that's cute. And they all have something like this, but it's like the star requirement to buy these costumes is so high that you're not going to get it. And that is sort of a frustrating thing about playing this game today, is that it's hard to get. Fortunately, we have gecko cheats. So if anyone is inspired to play this game by me, I recommend just cheating to get stars. I won't go into detail, but I'm sure if you just look up Excitebots gecko cheats, you can figure it out. The other thing is, so imagine playing this game and poker at the same time, because that's a mini game mode in this game.
Oh wow!
Which is basically okay. It's not quite the same game. It's kind of relegated to simpler courses, but the idea is that you're driving around a simpler course. You're still trying to get more. You're still trying to win based off of stars, but you get stars. A new way to get stars is that like there are cards scattered around not scattered around, but like, okay, let me back up and explain. Like every so often there will be a line of cards, and you can see what the cards are, and you can see what cards you have. And so you can use the D-pad to cycle your cards, and then run into a card to switch it out with that the card you ran into. So you can see like, okay, I have a 4, 5, and a 7, so I want to change out the one of my cards for a 6, so I can get a 4, 5, and 6, or whatever. I don't know. I don't play poker. I imagine that's a good thing to do. But like you have to keep in mind what cards you have, what cards you want, but you still have to go fast. Like you can't go slow, because if you go slow, someone might take the card that you want.
Right.
And it is. I never played it much because, again, I don't really do much in terms of multiplayer games, and also I don't play poker, but that is just like the most bizarre. Like you take the most over-the-top intense racing game and say, also now you have to pay attention to poker hands. And yeah, that's just the kind of game this is. It's like, okay, do that.
That's really good. if when you first sent the trailer for this and I watched this, I was just like, wow, yeah, it's crazy that they went with bots. It's crazy that they did X, Y, and Z. And I thought we were done with the crazy ride, but no, turns out there was yet another twist in the path for us.
Yeah, and it just frustrates me so much because Nintendo just totally, I don't know why they didn't like this game. They just threw it out there to die. And then there was a quote from one of the Nintendo of Australia people. I forgot to write down the exact quote, but she said like, yeah, I don't think we're gonna bring this game over because there's not much interest in it. And it's like, of course there's not much interest in it. Nobody knows it exists. So, yeah, I feel like this is a game that, like, if they, I don't know, brought it back and released it as, like, an eShop title, HD remaster, and, actually told people it existed, I feel like it would really find an audience. Because, like you were saying, it is very in line with the kind of zany stuff you expect from Nintendo now. And even back then, I feel like if they had marketed it properly, it wouldn't have found an audience, because the Wii, by that point, was very much the casual console. Like, I mean, I don't...
Simply because of that. More so because I think, in a weird way, just looking at the way this game plays and the kind of notes it's trying to hit, it almost feels like it's a little bit ahead of its time. Because I feel like in a way we've, especially during that era of Wii, I remember caring about like realism a lot more and caring a lot about I mean that's one of the reasons why I love Twilight Princess so much, just because it came out during a period of my life where I was just like, yeah, edgy Zelda, let's go, this is my shiz, and I was super excited about it. And I mean it's still a good game, not to brag on it, because I still love Twilight Princess, but
yeah.
In hindsight, I realized, obviously, the things that I really ended up loving about it were not just the tone, it's the gameplay too. And this is kind of that kind of game where it just said, hey, let's... this is going to be a really weird parallel, so just bear with me here. This feels like Speed Racer of its time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we need to talk about Speed Racer. I love
yeah,
that.
we did.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, Speed Racer of its time, it came out a year after Speed Racer.
Oh, well, there you go.
So it was a Speed Racer of Speed Racer's time. Yeah, I don't know. I know there's basically no chance of it happening, but I would love to see an HD remaster on the Switch. Just because I would love a way to officially be able to play the game in HD with analog stick controls. And also, I would love for other people to experience the game, because it's a silly game. I don't know if it's probably pretty hard to find, especially if you're not in North America. Yeah, but if
it looks like now, probably the only way you could just reliably play it would be through the emulator scene.
Yeah, and I hate that. Like,
officially endorse here.
Yeah, like I don't want to like officially tell people to do that, but like, Nintendo, give people a way to play this very silly, unique game. I don't know. I'm glad it has been preserved and available in some way. And I guess kind of to wrap things up, let's talk about what the developer did after this. So the game, understandably, bombed. Like, bombed is probably an understatement.
Oh boy.
It did not sell. But Monster Games still seemed to have a relationship with Nintendo after this. The same year, they released a game called a WiiWare game called Excitebike World Rally, which is really interesting because it is more of a it is more direct translation of the original Excitebike. It is a modernization of the original Excitebike, but with elements from Excite Truck and Excitebots. Like, they introduce the terrain deformation, but it's still the side-scrolling classic Excitebike.
Interesting.
And that's a pretty good game. But it's it's another one of those games. So, I mean, unlike Excitebots, where you could hypothetically find a used copy. You can't play Excitebike World Rally any other way than illegitimate ways, because it was a WiiWare game, a WiiWare exclusive game, and WiiWare is gone. So that sucks. And I wish they'd port that game too, because it's a really good game. After that, they had a chance to reboot another old Nintendo series that hadn't seen life in a long time. They made Pilot Wings Resort. It was a launch title for the 3DS that took Pilot Wings and put it on Woohoo Island with Mii's. And it was... I liked it. It was a pretty fun little game. It was sort of short and had very little content for a fully priced launch game, but it was a fun game, and like, you know, the fact that it was a flying game it made good use of the 3D depth element of the 3DS. After that, they did a couple of ports to the 3DS. They ported Donkey Kong Country Returns to the 3DS, which is actually a really solid port. And it's not just a port, they actually made a whole new world. Like, in the original game, the final world after you collect everything is just like one really hard level. So, but on the 3DS version, you get like a whole bunch of bonus levels that is capped off with that one really hard level, which was a really neat bonus.
What did they port it from?
The Wii. So they ported it, Donkey Kong Country Returns from the Wii to the 3DS. And
they added some zones. That's crazy. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, they added a new world with a bunch of new levels. And they also, a cool thing about it is that the original Wii version was built around motion controls, as you know, it was a Wii game, but that was probably like the least popular aspect of it, because to do simple attacks simple actions like the roll attack, you had to shake the controller, and that just wasn't as responsive as just pressing a button. So in the 3DS version, it is arguably a better version in a way, because you can just play it with buttons. You have to just play it with buttons, because you're not going to shake the device that you're holding to look at the screen. But yeah, it's a really solid port. They had to cut the frame rate in half, but it's still a good game. And kind of the bonuses make up for, I think, the graphical downgrade. And aside from the frame rate, the graphical downgrade is surprisingly not as big as you'd expect. It's still a nice looking game, and it makes good use of the 3DS depth effect. They also ported a Xenoblade Chronicles from the Wii to the new Nintendo 3DS, only on the new Nintendo 3DS, which is apparently that game, it like barely works on the 3DS, but barely works on the new 3DS as is. Like, optimally playing on the new 3DS, that game is still, a noticeable downgrade, but it's still amazing. Like, that is one of the best looking Wii games. The fact that they even got it working on the 3DS is insane. Were you about to say something?
No, I've never played the Xenoblade series, so I'm not super familiar, but there's a lot of really impressive looking 3DS games where the art style just kind of translates naturally somehow.
Well, I mean, so with Xenoblade, like, it wasn't really the art style. It has kind of a muddy art style, especially the first game. But the impressive thing about it is, like, it has these huge open environments that you didn't usually get on the Wii. Like, I mean, I don't know. After this, you should go look up some videos of it. Like, I don't know. If you're not into JRPGs, you're not going to love the game. I'm not super into JRPGs. I couldn't really get into it, but I can appreciate, like, how technically impressive it is. Like, it just has, like, these huge environments that were, I don't know, that actually looked really nice. Like, you would go into this area, huge environment, really nice scenery, and it was on the Wii somehow. And, like, I don't know how they did it. And then not only was it on the Wii, but Monster Games somehow made it work on the 3DS. Uh, let's see. On top of that, they also helped Retro Studios when making Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze for the Wii U. I'm not sure the extent that they helped out, but they apparently helped. Like, depending on where I look, sometimes Monster Games is listed as co-developer, sometimes they aren't. Like, I mean, if you go to Wikipedia on Monster Games' page, it says they co-developed Tropical Freeze, but on the Tropical Freeze page, it doesn't list Monster Games as a co-developer. So
that's awkward.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I don't know how much they helped with it, but apparently they are credited on the game. But after that, I guess their relationship with Nintendo just ended. Because since then, they've really only they've gone back to just doing like NASCAR games and similar stock car games. If I had to guess, and this is just speculation on my part, but I imagine because of the performance of Excitebots, which, again, that was totally Nintendo's fault. They sabotaged the game. But I imagine Nintendo wasn't really happy with that, and so they kind of started pushing Monster Games to do... that Monster Games, clearly, they just want to make racing games. That's clearly their passion, and it seems like Nintendo wanted them to do other things and wanted to be a support studio and do ports, and they didn't want to do that. So they it looks like they cut ties and went back to making NASCAR games, which is, you know, if they're happy making NASCAR games, that's great. But I don't know. I love Nintendo, but I hate when I run across these stories when it seems like they had a really good studio and then they just kind of didn't treat them right. And it seems like that happens a lot, especially with Western studios. But again, this is just speculation. I would love to be wrong and for get a surprise announcement of Excitebots 2 tomorrow, but that's not going to happen.
Oh, clearly this E3 is not the E3 to get excited for Excitebots 2.
Okay. Excitebots 2 for E3 2022.
Here we go.
There we go.
We'll start the campaign.
All right. So I think that's all I have to say about Excitebots. Thanks for joining me today, Kartik.
It was an exciting time.
And for anyone watching or listening to this, depending on how I decide to release it, if you like it, please let me know and I'll make more, because I have a lot of things to say about games.